So I'm going to go ahead and get started. I called this Mayhem to Mozart because I don't, our classrooms are kind of mayhem and everyone gets chaotic. So tonight, I would like to ask you if you would like to have your students excited for music class and not creating mayhem by acting up or not participating. I think we've all had those kids. How about retaining students because they and their families understand and appreciate making music? And see all of your students converse with you and their peers using the language of music, and develop students that practice and make an effort because they feel responsibility and ownership of the music that they're making. Now, those are pretty big promises, but I've seen this in my classroom in the last 15 years, and I'm really eager to share this with you. So my promise tonight is to show you strategies that are going to reduce stress for you and your students, that we're going to go beyond the music history and theory, and we're going to actually teach the students how to explore what the composer has for their creative ideas. We shouldn't just do men. We're going to do some lesson activities that develop musicianship quickly and effectively. And I'm going to show you my framework, and then it makes it really easy to talk music with your students, parents, and administrators because they really understand it. And then my goal this year is to show up every day with passion and integrity while maintaining the quality of my teaching, along with all the other things we're required to do. And when I show you what I think we should have in our classrooms, I think you're also going to have that really excited passion and integrity with your teaching. All right, so just a little bit brief story about myself. I started Suzuki in 1964. I'm actually one of the oldest American Suzuki students. And I even got the opportunity to study with Suzuki in Japan. And this was about 1984, I think. I have a bachelor's in violin performance, and I ended up getting a master's in Suzuki pedagogy. I have my teacher certification, National Board Certified Teacher. I also have taken classes in Kindermusik, Orff, Kodai, and Dalcroze. I love to learn. I have 3 boys, 2 cellists and a violinist. And then, I was a director of community music schools. I've been a professor. I'm an orchestra teacher in the schools right now, and I also conduct with the Milwaukee Youth Symphony. So a lot of what I do is making sure that the students that I work with, no matter what age they are, really understand music. Even if they don't continue to play, my goal is to make them educated patrons of the arts. So about 15 years ago, I was working with the Milwaukee Youth Symphony, and they had a lot of students from the inner city. I was also at a school district that was on the border of Milwaukee, and I realized a lot of my students had no background in music. Now, I probably would have flunked them or told them to get out of music or a lot of other things, but I had the benefit or the privilege to be on a literacy team and learned that students need a lot of background information, a lot of background knowledge for them to really understand the language of music, and that you know how complicated it is. So when I saw that these students just needed more background information, I started developing this framework to show them how to understand music. And there are a lot of failures. I'll freely admit that. But one thing I learned is that they have common misperceptions and misunderstandings. And you know this. You ask them what a key signature is, and they give you the answer 4/4. What's a scale? 2 sharps. I mean, it's just funny how they always give us the answer sharps. Where's the 8th rest? I don't know what that is. So we've all asked, how many times, I know I've taught this. In fact, one of the things that really started me on this path is I had just given my 6th graders I had talked about the tempo, the title, the dynamics, and asked them 15 minutes later. I think I sent that out, and they couldn't do it. And I realized they were not retaining what I was teaching because they didn't have the background knowledge. the research says that students only learn material they already understand. And if you think about that, that's really true. The students that answer our questions accurately have high background knowledge and high processing ability, so they have an advantage. Most of our students are taking more time to process. They need our help to put words and concepts into categories so that they can build their scaffolds. And that's what you're going to see tonight, is that I'm helping them build scaffolds. And we'll talk about how to do it for middle school, elementary, even college ages. So one of the things that I want to bring out right now is, as a teacher, with finite minutes, we have so much to teach. And of course, I just made a little list, and then, you've got the grr and you've got the and oh, I can't do this all. And that's one of the things, especially when you're in a performance classroom or you're teaching private students, we tend to get so much into the skills and the techniques that we're forgetting that we need to teach musicality. Or if we do teach musicality, we kind of throw it out there. And this is me. I'm talking about how I used to do it. I throw it out there and expect them to remember what I taught them, and then be frustrated when they wouldn't recall it. And we know the research that kids need more time with the concepts. But what you're going to see tonight is how we get that. So we have to ask ourselves, for our students, the deeper question is, why should they care? A lot of the things that we do with our students, like we teach them a scale or we teach them some rhythm, we think they understand that we are taking it out of the piece that we're working on, or we're asking them a certain question about the piece. But they don't understand that. They see it as two separate categories. The scale that you ask them to play has no relation to the song or piece that they're learning. And this is what we're going to be talking about tonight. We're going to try to make it more relevant and applicable so they can connect these pieces. So with the decoder framework, I just wanted to share a couple of teacher comments. First one is, students now work in teams and speak up boldly in class with questions or ideas. They play so much more musically and with better balance. My band colleague that works with the framework has noticed improvement in her performances because her students are responding to the deep dives that she's doing on the pieces. And then my choir colleague just loves it because students are, and I can't really see that because my thing's in the way, students are understanding the text. I know that she's talking about that. So these are things that they're sharing with me that really help them with the musicality in their classrooms. So here we go. We're going to flip the class a little bit, but really what we're going to do is flip the music. So a composer, this is from Aaron Copland's What to Listen For in Music. I never thought about this before, but a composer wants us to know why they chose that title. When was it written? Who am I and when did I live? What did I do to make this piece special? How do I want you to play this? What do you think of my tempo? And some other questions. It's actually a triangle where the composer wrote the music, the performers are learning how to play it, and we are interpreting it for the audience. And when I understood that that was the triangle that we were making, that really affected the way I was teaching, because I wanted my audience to understand more about the music, not just my kids play it really well and we play a concert and thanks, that was great. And as I share this, you'll see how the parents and the families actually get involved in this flipping the class, if you want to call it that. So composers rely on musicians to bring their written music alive. So what happens to composers when no one plays their music? I actually asked some students about that. It's like authors, not what happens when nobody reads their books. So as a musician, you understand the composer's information on the written page. You link your background knowledge to the explicitly stated meanings from the composer. But you have to also figure out the implicit meanings that are supposed to be part of it. Then the question is, how do you make it yours? And I've asked my orchestra that. How do we make this our orchestra piece? How do we make it so that we're honoring the composer, but yet we're making sure that the audience understands what they're doing? One of the things that what we're playing, one of the things that I really talk about is how melody, that's the audience's responsibility, is to follow the melody as it moves along. Well, they've not heard this piece before. We've practiced it a lot, so we know where the melody is. But this is something that the families are supposed to do. And I point out that the music that everybody listens to right now, the melody is really easy to figure out because the singer always sings the melody. And you've got a couple backup singers that might do some interruptions or interjections, but the melody is easy to figure out. That's why I think a lot of people don't appreciate instrumental music. And I don't know, we've all gotten, oh, I don't like classical music. And I think it's because they don't understand that they're supposed to listen to the melody. So my presentation tonight, we're going to be talking solely about melody. So the strategies that I'm using are going to involve students in using content-specific vocabulary. We're going to address misconceptions and misunderstandings because they can't hide that from you. It's relevant and applicable, which is my little favorite statement to say. Your results, and these are the results that I've had for a couple of years now. I've done this for 15 years. I would say the last 10 years, I've really seen these results. I have 98% retention of my students choosing a music elective. Students are developing creativity and critical thinking skills, and they feel confident to perform, and they're really good at composing and improvising themselves. I don't have to teach that to them because they understand what a composer does. And well, I should say I teach it from their music, and then they're able to apply it to a composition. Their performances are fantastic. They play with expression, energy, and they even show up to the concert. And that was a big deal because a lot of times they don't, they are like, oh, I don't want to come to the concert. It's a whole nother night that I have to do this. My kids know that they're part of a team. They know they have a responsibility to honor the composer. And I really don't have anybody that doesn't want to show up. Now, they don't drive, so if their parents choose not to come, but the kids are usually devastated that they can't be there. The other thing is they have opportunities to explore and discuss the music. And I only do it for their concert pieces. I know we do a lot of other supplemental literature, but the reason that I only do it on the concert music is that they can focus in. All right, so I've been throwing a lot of things at you. Does anyone have a question that they want to ask really quickly? You can unmute yourselves or put it in the chat. Yeah, it doesn't matter what kind of music that you teach, it's going to work for everybody. Because I'm an orchestra teacher, I tend to talk in orchestra-specific language. But what I'm going to be showing you is it's going to work with everybody. Rock, hip hop, Beethoven, Beyonce, singing, whatever, it does work. And I'll show you some of the different ways. All right, so I wanted to share a student story because the most exciting result of these strategies has been the impact on the students. So Christian was a student of mine that showed up in 6th grade orchestra. It was required, so he had to be there. His mom chose him to play the violin because she had played violin when she was little, and Christian did not want to be there. He was really resistant. He actually didn't even want to be in school. He would end up fighting with kids and get kicked out. He would be suspended, just really bad. However, in orchestra, he started as we worked through the framework that I'm going to be showing you, he ended up realizing that he was just as comfortable talking about it as another person in the groups. His name was Sean. Sean had had piano lessons for a million years. And Christian realized he could talk to Sean about music. So by the end of first semester, Christian loved orchestra. The other classes he wasn't so comfortable in, and there were some behavior issues, but in orchestra, I never had any issues with him. And it got so that he loved orchestra so much that the principal was taking orchestra away from him if he had bad days in any other class, which I was not a fan of because he needed something. But through orchestra and music, and we've all had those students. He now is a sophomore in a university. The college website was talking about how he's majoring in liberal studies. And this is a student that no one would have thought went to college. What I especially liked is his hobbies include playing guitar, playing, writing, and listening to music. And that just makes me excited and weepy at the same time, because that's the kind of impact we're going to have on our students. So thank you for letting me share that story about Christian. So here we go. The very first thing that I teach my students is about composers' choices. Why does this music exist? Now think about it from your perspective in your class. Why does RLE exist? Why does Ode to Joy exist? What are the reasons behind the music? Well, the composer actually had to start making choices before they wrote the music. And I think that's fascinating. They just don't sit down and start writing. They have to have a reason for it. So what does the title mean? We don't realize it. And when I say we, it's just one of the ways I used to teach. We don't realize that they don't understand the title. So I paraphrase the title, I explain generic titles, I define unusual words, and I describe the origin, whether it's a folk song or it came from Beethoven's Ninth or whatever it did. Talk about the composer. I have 5 things that I always make sure that they know. The name, and you'd be surprised at how they didn't realize where to look for the composer's name. What era they're from, I will often write that underneath the composer's name before I make copies. What country they're from, what they're most famous for. So if we're playing Ode to Joy, I might say that they're most famous for that, but they also have Für Elise. Is it arranged? Now, most of the time for my pieces, they are, but the kids have learned to look for that information on the written page. I'll ask them about vocabulary, or as the teacher, I'll look through and see if there's some vocabulary that they may not understand. And symbols too. Symbols are another issue that they have. Ask them about the tempo. And I'll show you some ways that I actually do that to support their learning in the categories. Do they use an Italian word, or are they using descriptives? Because a lot of composers are starting to use descriptives now. So dynamics, do they know the labels? Are there any patterns or contrasts? The blue stuff is what I would more ask for a high school level or a higher level. Now, special effects, that's a category I created because I didn't know what else to call them. And I figured that with their movie watching that they would like that. So there are actually, like 50 different kinds of special effects that you can have. I just wrote some of them down there that I use. Accents, mutes, tremolo, cultural techniques, trills, grace notes, glissandos, chords, arpeggios, things like that. Again, for the higher level learner. So that's what we talk about with composers' choices. But now, how do I do that? So here is one of the articles that I have the kids read. Now, what I wanted to share with you is, you notice it's really short. There was one spectacular failure I had where I had a whole big packet on opera, and I was so excited for them to read it. And it took them the entire class period. They retained absolutely nothing. And when I went to ask a literacy teacher what I had done wrong, she actually laughed at me and said, first of all, that's way too much information. They'll never get it. The second thing that I did wrong is I did not ask questions after the paragraph. I waited till the end. And she told me, and it doesn't matter what age student it is, maybe college won't have to worry about this, but they can't find the information unless the questions are asked right after that paragraph. They don't know how to find it. So you'll see here that there's a little bit of information on Dvorak, and then Humoresque, which is the piece that we're going to be talking about. And then, and I could have the questions right after the paragraph on the composer. In the way it fit on my document, I ended up doing it this way. But then I'm asking them to retain that information. What era is he from? What country? What does the title mean? And so they have to go back in and, whimsical or fanciful composition. Those are pretty big words for an elementary or a middle school. So I would probably change that and come up with some kind of a synonym. Now, one of the questions about what kind of title, there's actually about 5 generic titles. The generic structure or form, like a symphony, a string quartet, or chorale, an oratorio, those are, actually, I don't think oratorios are called that. They're called by something else. But symphonies and quartets for sure. That's a generic name. There's a generic... There's a generic name about the number of players. You can have people named for characters, ideas, or concepts. And if you think about like the Sorcerer's Apprentice or the Firebird Suite or even Hamilton, that would be a title that would be a character. They might have personal, and that would be for Elise. And the songs, the kids don't realize, and that's funny, the songs, they don't often realize that the title is in the music itself. And if it's not, there's some special reason that they chose to call it by a different name. So I will have my kids maybe circle this in case, so that they get the idea of the titles. And so I can ask, what does the title mean? Or I can ask what kind of title it is. I ask when it was written, and it should be up in the information up there. For what instrument? Again, as a solo violin piece, they may not realize it was written for the piano. And then why did the composer write this piece? So those are some questions that I use to get them to really think about the history. And I want to encourage you to have those kinds of questions, because I learned they just end up watching. I mean, they not watching, they end up reading without retaining. So being forced to go back there, and I say forced, but they really don't mind that. Kids actually love to learn. All right, so the next thing that I'm going to talk about is, here's what I do to really talk about the choices. So Dvorak used descriptive tempo words for humoresque. What does he want you to do? And so they would have to answer that. Now, he has a lot of vocabulary. So I actually check them and see if that they know all of the vocabulary that he puts down. So they have to fill that out. And I do have this on Google Forms. I'm going to show that to you later. But I will tell you, I don't know if it's because I'm old school, or I should not say old school, because I'm old and I'm not a big fan of technology. I'm finding out that the kids retain a lot more if I put it in a piece of paper beside them. So that's the way I've chosen to do it, but I do have a Google form that you guys can use. I'll show you that in a minute, and that really helps. So those of you that are elementary, when it comes to circle the dynamics, I wouldn't have this long list. When I teach elementary, I usually do piano, mezzo forte, forte, and that's it. Unless the music has the other dynamics in there, or I can start teaching them that a little bit later. For middle school, I probably wouldn't have the pianissimo, the triple P or triple F if there's there, but I would definitely start showing them of the long category. When they circle the special effects, you can see that I'm having them think about these words as we circle them. And again, if I were teaching elementary, I probably wouldn't put all of these words here. If I was teaching higher level, I would actually ask for them for more. Maybe the piece doesn't have all of this articulation, but I would ask them for all of the articulation to see if they can pull up and recall what that vocabulary word means. So the articulation styles, if as an orchestra teacher, I usually say bowing styles. If I were a choir teacher or a general music, you might talk about how you want the consonants said or certain texts. Maybe you have a different language. Again, my band and choir colleague take these and use them as they want to. One of the things about the band teacher is she won't discuss key signatures as much as she'd like because it's too confusing when there's so many different key signatures in her band class. So this would be how a elementary and middle school person would see my categories. If I were teaching high school and college and they should already know them, I wouldn't have them circle the dynamics. They would have to name the dynamics. Now, I want to give you a caution about circling the dynamics or actually anything about the dynamics. Kids will start with the very first dynamic you have down there. So, and they will search the entire piece for it. Then they'll move on to the next one, pianissimo, and then they'll search the whole piece for the pianissimo because they haven't learned that the composer may not have put that in there. So I always make a point of telling them the very first dynamic, circle it. Then when you find the next dynamic, circle it so that it takes a lot less time. That was one of the things I had to learn because they were not very good at doing that. It took hours the first time. All right. So if I were teaching an advanced decoder with melody, I would say for songs, it's really easy to hear the melody because someone is singing it. With instrumental music, not so much. So we talk about melody as the main character. And that sounds funny maybe to us, but if you think about all the literacy strategies and the literacy books and the literacy hours that they spend, it makes sense to them. So then I asked them about the character. And some of this is for middle school. I think you could do it with elementary. You definitely can do it with a high school because they're not going to need those supportive questions that we had before. So for songs, it's easy to hear the melody because someone's singing it. Oh, I already read that. So character, is it mostly tuneful like a song? Is it mostly rhythm like Beethoven's Fifth or Philip Glass? Is it smooth like a lullaby, or is it tense or disjointed? And I make sure that they understand that there are no right or wrong answers, so that it really is how they hear it. And that gives them the freedom to really talk about it without feeling that they're going to give a wrong answer, because that's how they hear it. If they hear it as a tense piece, it's tense for them. If they hear it as a lullaby, that's great. Now, I've never had that big of a disconnect with that, but a lot of kids will think, oh, this doesn't sound tense, where another kid will say, oh, this sounds really angry. The emotional impact, does it use a major scale or a minor one? Yeah, I think somebody's got, needs to mute. I can't quite see that. Oh, thank you very much. So the emotional impact, first I ask them if it's a major or minor. Do you hear one main melody or do you hear several different melodies? And again, I'll talk to them. Is it like Harry Potter that has three main characters, or is it going to be something that's a lot more simple? Even in folk songs, and I teach my orchestra students a lot of folk songs, they are learning and looking at the melody, and they really decide whether it's two different, because most folk songs will have two different phrases, and they'll decide if that's one character or two. It makes an interesting conversation. So this is what I learned from Aaron Copland and how the audience is supposed to listen for the melody. The question is for them, do you always hear a melody? Not really. I mean, there's usually some filler measures. Does the melody disappear and then reappear? They think about that. What's the tone color of this melody? What instrument is playing it? What voice is singing it? How come a soprano is singing the melody and not a bass? How come, and you can think of all the questions that you'd like to ask them. So do different instruments have the melodies, or do different vocal parts have the melody? For example, when my choir was singing for church this Sunday, we did a hymn and, soprano gets the melody the whole time. The kids were like, oh, yeah, no big, that's always happens. But at least they saw that. And that's one of the things that I encourage. And then is the melody passed around the ensemble? That's the goal. It's not only the first violins or the sopranos that get the melody, you want to have it passed around. And even if it's not passed around, it's still something that they can do. Just talk about. So that would be something at a higher level. I don't always, in fact, I'll be honest, I don't teach this in the first semester of a new year. They're not ready for it, but my goal is that they're going to be ready for it by the end of the year. So I wanted to share some parent comments because one of the things that I've discovered is that breaking it down to this kind of question and answer, and I know you teach this, we all do, but I think what the difference is it's in a structure that the kids can understand. It also is written down or on a Google form, so I make sure I teach it. And I don't ever do this in one class period. I definitely take maybe 5 minutes out of a class, 10 minutes if it's a little tricky, or maybe they're coming back from a fire drill, or sub plans. Now, I will say that if you're going to do it as a sub plan, I would make sure that you have peer groups. The other issue with that is if you haven't modeled how to fill out a decoder, and I call it decoder because that sounds a lot more fun than they're actually called empty grids. Well, that doesn't sound too exciting. So what we decided is we're going to call them decoders because we're understanding music fundamentals by cracking the composer's code and decoding their creative ideas. So it's a lot more fun to say, oh, go get your decoders out. So they actually do two things. They share this with their families because it's part of the requirement that they talk about it with their families. We've also done slides that we sent about each piece that we're performing for our parents or families. And that goes home, and the parents and families can look at the slides and learn about the pieces. So here's a comment that just blew me away. I never realized how different each piece is until Kaylee showed us the compare and contrast sheet where we put all the decoders on one sheet. Abby always comes home and talks about what she learned in orchestra. Zach showed me the Vivaldi Four Seasons video. So again, somebody got to see Vivaldi that had never seen it before. Leo is on his Chromebook watching the composer celebrations and finding new music by that composer. And I love this one. Chenna loves listening to the Holst Planets, and we even got tickets to go hear it in Chicago. To hear that bonding that's happening between the parents and the children, helps us keep kids in music because the parents are understanding how important music is. It's not just a hobby, it's something that they can all learn. And it's something that they can share. And actually, I've even had the parents go, the kids go home. And especially with my private students, I ask the families to fill out the decoders at home together. And then I have them bring in the decoder and we talk about some of the problems or some of the things that they wrote. And that is another way that I can make sure that they're understanding. All right, so let me, hopefully. Okay, so my promise tonight is that we talked about some strategies to reduce stress, and I talked really fast so that I could do this under an hour. And by having your students explore the composer's choices. Now, we focused on the entire list of choices, but then we really did a deep dive into melody. I showed you some lesson activities to develop musicianship quickly and effectively with the decoder framework, which makes it easy to check for students' misperceptions, no more bad answers. Now, I had the Google form, maybe that's back up. Oh, I don't even know where it is. I'll have to look. Maybe I'll have to send it to you. I know it's on the slides. But I really want to tell you that you will find that you and your students show up every day with more passion and less mayhem, which is why we talked about Mayhem to Mozart, because they're going to have ownership in their learning, performing, and being part of the community. So are there any questions? Oh, the link of few slides back. Thank you. Let's go back and do that. Oh, there it is. Okay, so this Google form, it's the same thing we just did. Why does this music exist? I don't have the kids answer that. What do you know from the title? Oh, Google always wants something. What is the who is the composer? Is this piece arranged? What's the tempo? Now, if you look, do you see all the tempos? And then there's an other for them to do. And we know we could put a lot more tempos there. What dynamics are chosen? So the kids go through and they click this. And so if you want a quick way for them to see it, and for you to see what they're not understanding, Google Forms is a great way to do that. And if you're good at Google Forms, go for it. So what dynamics are chosen? Check all that apply. What special effects did they choose? Now, the orchestra teachers will laugh because that's all orchestra. And then we ask what bowing style, and we have another long list. And then we talk about the era of the composer, and you'll have access to this Google form. And then what genre does this piece represent? So this is clearly the composer's choice. Do I have any questions on that one? Okay, so what I want to do is spend some time and do a question and answer. So I'm going to stop my share. And are there some questions? Of course, I was talking, so I didn't look at the...
Is this something that you would grade for students or not necessarily and treat it more as a learning experience?
I do both. I don't grade as much in the beginning, but I definitely start grading them toward the end of the year. I will also grade them on certain specific questions. There are some of those questions that they're answering that I know we say there's no right or wrong, you just answer your best, but there are. I mean, you can't ask a key signature and they say sharps and that's going to be the right answer. So yes, there are ways that I do that. For an extremely difficult class to be interested, I've had those classes, and I will tell you that the best way to do it is to start on a piece or a song that they really like. Now, let me give you an example. So I have a principal in one of my schools that absolutely hates music. I mean, we could all raise our hand about that, right? I ended up doing a presentation on this framework, and I actually chose Smokey Robinson's My Girl, and we talked about who Smokey was, why he wrote the piece, all of the background. And then I showed them how the melody is throughout the piece, how the four men who are like background singers kind of interject. And because I did a combination of talking about those things, the teachers got really interested in it. In fact, one of them, the gym teacher, said to me afterwards, "Oh, I wish you had taught me music." So that's what I would probably do with a extremely difficult class. And I wouldn't maybe go all the way through it. If you have 5 pieces, what I would do is say to them, okay, we're going to see what the title means of these 5 pieces and see if they can do it. If you can get them to do it peer to peer, that also is really good. Now, that sounds a little scary, but again, if they're doing it on their Chromebooks or they're doing it on paper, that really makes a difference. All right.
When in the process of learning a piece would you hand out the decoder? Is it right away at the beginning or after they've been maybe playing it for a little bit?
I've done it both ways. It usually is if I have it ready. And I also can tell when the kids are ready to do something a little different. For example, if they're really into learning a piece, the orchestra teachers know Dragon Hunter. If they're really into learning Dragon Hunter and they just want to play it, I might wait. However, there was the opera piece that I did years ago. They were like, I hate opera. I never want to learn opera. And so we actually started right away talking about the title and working with the music. And when they began to see and I use a lot of YouTube videos, but they saw that opera aria that we were playing was actually on The Simpsons, and they used it for a commercial. Some of you may remember the Rice Krispie commercial, but they got really into it because it was like, oh, I know this piece, I've seen it. And so it really depends on what I'm asking them to do. So is it helpful for general music? As I said, it doesn't matter what kind of music it is. So I talked about classroom management. One of the things that I do, especially with a rowdy class that was definitely last year, I would have them come into the classroom and I would have them do decoders like right away while I was tuning. They had to work with their stand partner or a neighbor to work on it and see how far they could get. I've also had it up on my smart board so they could go up and do, choose the answer up on the board. So is there anything else?
With the compare and contrast you were talking about, is that you look at all the different decoders from your different pieces and just kind of look at them that way?
Yes. So I actually will share with you the compare and contrast decoder so that you can see. I don't have the kids answer all the questions. I might have them answer just some specific ones because it gets really long if you're asking them all of the questions. Because one of the things that we didn't talk about, and I'll show you in a minute, is decoders actually have 5 parts. And the last couple webinars I did, I tried to get through all 5 parts, and it was just way too much. So that's one of the things that we're going to talk about in a few minutes is how you do the rest of the parts. So my compare and contrast, we'll talk about maybe the key signature or the culture it's from. For example, when I did a theme about around the world, we talked about the cultural techniques that were in each piece. We talked about the language. We actually asked what kind of food they were. what they would eat and really enjoy.
I'll ask another one if no one else has questions.
Go for it.
You mentioned composition earlier. Could you give an example of different composition, either projects or assignments? Especially, I'm thinking the younger students that you've done in the past.
Yeah. So now I borrowed this from a friend of mine. We had the kids do a composition on summer. So they had to think of 6 different things that they really liked about summer. And so they had to assign a noise, a sound, a phrase about summer. So if they were talking about lemonade, they could have a little phrase, they could have a sound, they could do whatever they wanted. Again, composer's choice. What do you want to do? And then out of those 6 things, they ended up trying to figure out if they wanted a melody that was going to be like a melody just horizontally. After summer, brain is like, oh, get these words. So if they wanted it horizontal, or if they had a sound, let's say lemonade was a melody, little phrase, and being on the beach was a sound that they, like a snap of their fingers, did they want it vertically? So because they understood how the composer made their choices, what the title is, what they wanted to do, what tools they used, like key signatures and rhythm patterns, and then the conversation that they create at the end, they were able to do 8 measure compositions really easily without me, trying to force it down their throats. I'll give you an example. My kids had a teacher in high school who had them do a composition, but she would just say, I want a 16 measure composition and I'm going to grade it. And without the support of knowing how a composer does the choices, tools, and conversations, those high school kids were really lost because they knew how to play music, but they hadn't really done the theory and the history and all the other stuff behind it. What I do with these decoder frameworks is not the deep theory, but what I'm doing is I'm teaching them the scaffolding and the fundamentals at the bottom. So when you start teaching advanced theory and all of the other stuff, they have a foundation to build it on. I have like a advanced conversation where the students have to look at the form. They have to look at how the melody, we talked about the melody. They have to look at how the energy pattern is all the way through the piece. And actually I do that with my middle school kids. How does the energy pattern change? The energy pattern is what I call rhythm patterns because it's confusing to the kids. So do you see how that support? We do composition in April because they've had enough time in my middle school that they understand that. That was a long answer.
How do you help kids make music theirs?
Oh, yeah, that's one of the things I would love to share with you. For example, I had Jasmine, who we were playing a piece that had lots of variations. And again, this is all going to be orchestra specific, so I'm sorry about that. We were playing a variation that was martelé, marcato, very accented. And she raised her hand and she said, I've never seen us play spiccato. Could we try this variation spiccato? And I'm like, yeah, because one of the rules that we have is we can never say no. We have to try it and then we vote on it. So everybody loved her spiccato. So we put that in the performance. So that became theirs. And, she was a viola player. So all the violas are like, yeah, we decided we were going to play spiccato. I had students where they experiment, maybe the composer puts pizzicato. They experiment. Maybe they want collegno. And it's interesting to me because whatever, like we experiment with changing the tempos, we experiment with changing the dynamics, we experiment with changing the articulation. And I would say 95% of the time, they want to do it the way the composer wants them to play it. But having experienced those different aspects to it, or different special effects, they feel like they're closer to the composer. So that's how they make it theirs. I actually have a whole list of things where Isaac, we were playing the Pachelbel canon. I know it's a middle school favorite. So he decided, I'd like to hear what it sounds like with D minor. And it was terrible. Everybody hated it. And that would renew their excitement for playing Pachelbel in D major. We've done, because they know those long lists of things, they know that they could play pianissimo instead of fortissimo. So that's how they make it theirs. And what I'm saying is they make it theirs, but they also use the composer as their guide.